Well, the secret's out. The Boulder, Colorado shooter yesterday was not a WASP. He was not your typical white American incel. It turns out he was a Syrian migrant who was a practicing Muslim. Now, I'm not going to go out there and say the guy's not white, because as far as I'm concerned, just look at Assad. I mean, he's pretty pale. He's got blue eyes. Look at his wife. The Mediterranean coast, they're as white as Italians or Spaniards. Just because they're from the Eastern Mediterranean rather than the Western or the Northern Mediterranean. I mean, it doesn't make much of a difference. I think genetically there's been so calling them non-white is a bit of a stretch. But as far as the American context goes, they would not be considered white. That's because it's a cultural thing in America. If you're a Muslim, you're not white automatically, even if you're a white Muslim. Even Bosnians don't seem to be considered very white in America. And so I have to say I was a bit surprised by this, because I just made a comment yesterday, was it, or no, 2 days ago, when talking about the Asian the Asian American moral panic, or the Asian hate moral panic, and about how, you notice how at a certain point we went from having all these shooters who were all Muslim men to all being essentially people who could be white men who are native-born Americans who could be tied to the right in some way. Although, well, not even. I shouldn't say that. They're not. But they were all the shootings that got publicity, and all the terror attacks were all blamed on the right. And it was weird, because we went from a point where you had all these terror attacks blamed on Muslims to all these terror attacks blamed by white guys. And I was talking about that in the context of this last shooting on Friday. And then all of a sudden, the next day, we get a shooting from a Muslim. So I guess that kind of blows a hole in my theory. Maybe I can't be quite as conspiratorial as I want to, or maybe the CIA, or the FBI, watched my video on Tuesday, and they said, you know what, we gotta prove this guy wrong. Let's make a Muslim go shoot some people up. Let's rile up a Muslim again. It's been a while. Let's just whip him up into a frenzy. Go into the chat rooms. Go on, I don't know, 8chan or wherever these guys go, and tell him, you know what you really need to do? Go kill some Americans. Make them pay for all their racism. Now, I believe the guy's name was Ahmad al-Isa, pretty clearly not the narrative that the media was looking for, and so I guess they're going to, they're very quickly trying to move on from the shooting itself to gun control and just say, oh, it's about guns, which is, I remember they did a very similar thing after or the Orlando shooting back in, what was it, 2014, what was it, Pulse nightclub, that's what it was, the gay bar that was shot up by a Muslim, presumably, I believe, because he didn't like gays. Kind of makes sense. If you're a really religious guy, they have this gay bar. I mean, can you think of a more extreme den of sin and villainy than a gay bar, other than maybe a brothel? Or, maybe some kind of a gay brothel. I guess that could be the worst thing. Gay bathhouse. Anyway, this guy came in, shot up a gay bar. I believe that at first the media, because I remember hearing the news. It was on a Saturday night. I think I was actually awake when the news first broke. I couldn't sleep that night. And I think the media was trying to go at the angle that this was probably some kind of right-winger who hated gays. This was back before all of the right, supported gay marriage, because that was before the Supreme Court told them to. And then, Catholic Marco Rubio says, well, it's settled law now. We can't talk about gay marriage anymore. And so the media was all set to blame this and say, oh my gosh, look at this right-wing hate killing gay people. And then it turns out it was a Muslim. And they're like, well, let's pivot to gun control, because we can still say guns are bad. Because this Muslim guy, even if he hated the gays, he wouldn't have been able to kill them all if he didn't have a gun. So we gotta grab all the guns from the normal, well-adjusted white Americans. And thankfully that didn't work, just like the Sandy Hook ploy didn't work. Every one of these gun control pushes just makes people buy more guns. Now, at this point, this isn't very helpful for gun sales, because gun sales have been through the roof for a year. You can't get any guns very easily. I mean, they all sell out immediately. Prices are, just like prices of everything, going through the roof over the past year. So I'm not going to say that this is going to have, these shootings are going to have much of an effect on gun sales, because gun sales are already, it's like lumber sales. It doesn't matter how many you produce, they're going to be sold immediately, and the price is going to keep going up. Oh, and by the way, just to clarify, I was, being a little tongue-in-cheek earlier, saying that, like, well, they kind of blew up my narrative by having a white shooter and a Muslim shooter back to back. Not really the case, because, frankly, you can't put it past the FBI. The American intelligence community has done so much worse in the third world, and in the second world and the first world, probably, over the years, than just push people to commit these shootings. I mean, hell, openly, the U.S. military nuked 2 Japanese cities. So, I mean, after that, you can't really put much past the U.S. intelligence community. But again, we won't know if they had any involvement for a very, very long time in radicalizing these people, although we know that this is kind of their MO for doing sting operations. They find people online who are vulnerable, who apparently this guy was bullied a lot as a kid. That's what his brother's saying. He said that people made fun of him for being a muzzy, and that he had mental problems and all these issues, and so it was all pent up. He was rising up against the white supremacy in his own way. Apparently, that's kind of the brother's take on all this. And I guess, I forget who it was, maybe Posobiec had said, at first we were told that this shooting was an example of white supremacy, and now we're being told that the shooter was a victim of white supremacy once they found out that the guy was a Muslim. But anyway, the intel folks, they find these guys online, they rile them up, and, if they're doing it, if they're under officially what they'll do when they find these guys, they'll rile them up, and then they'll arrest them for attempting to commit an act of terror. So, I mean, there are plenty, even if it's just by accident, there's certainly a big possibility that some of these terror attacks that we see have some FBI involvement. And when the timing of them, and when the nature of them so well fits into a narrative that we saw building for a few weeks before either of these shootings happened. Like, we see no shootings for a long time, and then all of a sudden, there's a big push for gun control, and you get these shootings, and the timing is very suspicious. And so, anyway, I was saying, it'll take a very long time. It'll take decades. Probably after the collapse of the American Empire, we'll have a moment like when the Stasi files were opened, and we learn everything that they were doing. We'll probably get something similar with the FBI and the CIA and all these things, and we'll know the full extent of everything they did. So I'm just saying, keep that idea in your head. It's possible. We don't know. It's not confirmed, but it makes certain things would make sense. Now, on to the political implications. As I mentioned before, this fits very well into the gun control narrative. And Biden today came out and he gave a speech. And he seems to think that he's got the wind at his back, and this is very good. I want when there's a push for gun control, because they were trying to push through the so-called universal background checks law as a standalone thing, which to me is dangerous, because that's something I think that actually could get through. And then what that is gun registration, and that's a very good first step for them to get through, because once you get that through, and everybody who has the guns, and there's a centralized database of that. And, because, or I shouldn't say there's a centralized database. At least the documentation will exist then, because private transfers will be illegal. So, they'll be able to, if they go through all of the forms and the paperwork, find everybody who has a gun. And so therefore, theoretically, if they ban a certain class of guns, they can go through all the paperwork of everybody who has purchased one of those and say, hey, turn in your guns. So it's a very easy pathway to gun confiscation. And so I would be scared if just that got through. But since they feel like they have momentum now, Biden came out and he gave a speech indicating that they're going to push harder. They're going to push for more than just this. They want an assault weapons ban, and they want the so-called high-capacity magazine ban. So essentially the Clinton gun ban of '94. That's what they want to bring back. Very old idea, something that has been debated to death, something that people are very familiar with, and something that is going to be a non-starter with anyone in this country who's remotely pro-gun. And so by pushing all three of these at once, it will make the issue much more toxic than if they were just pushing these, the background check thing. They're biting off more than they can chew. They're overplaying their hand, as I hope that they do. I have always said this. I want the Dems to overplay their hand. And the reason for this is that when you do that, you lose. If you play a little more conservatively, you try and take a niblet here or there, you play the incrementalist game. It's very easy to play the incrementalist game when you're taking away rights. Because when you're losing your rights bit by bit, people don't feel it. But if you take them away all at once, that creates a lot of pain. And that's exactly what they're going to do if they try and pass all this stuff at once. You're going to get states left and right nullifying this, which is exactly what I want to see. In fact, I hope Ron DeSantis, being that he's been willing to lead the way on the anti-lockdown stuff, that maybe the state of Florida would, even though there are other states who have done this already. I think Missouri will probably have a pretty good law in place, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, I think is what they called it. We in Florida definitely need to come out and make it clear that, hey, federal government decides to pass some unconstitutional gun control laws, i.e. any new gun control laws should be declared unconstitutional, we're going to nullify them. The various county sheriffs in Florida should not enforce them. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement should not enforce it. The Florida Wildlife Commission should not enforce it. And every state that is remotely favorable to the Second Amendment should do this. We need to have Second Amendment sanctuary states. There's no reason not to. Colorado is a recreational marijuana sanctuary state, and they're doing just fine. You know what? They want their marijuana, and I think they should have it. Frankly, I wish Florida was too. I just think that, I think it's a dumb law to enforce. I think that throwing somebody in jail over weed is stupid. Most people think that that's stupid these days. Thankfully, I wish they would feel that way about a lot more things. But hey, at least we're making some progress there. And I think that even more people in the country will feel that way about guns than they do about marijuana. And frankly, I know that there's going to be a lot of sheriffs who, if any of these laws are passed, will take on the federal government and their state governments head on by declaring their counties to be sanctuary counties. I assure you, even though I don't live there, Polk County, Florida, is not going to be enforcing any sort of assault weapons ban. And I know that already in a lot of states, you have sheriffs and local governments who have declared their counties to be Second Amendment sanctuary counties. I believe this started in Illinois, because in Illinois you have that very sharp division between essentially Chicago, which controls the state government, and the rest of Illinois, which is, pretty deep red. Now, I think that if you have enough counties that choose to nullify these federal laws, county sheriffs asserting their role as the county sheriff, to choose, what laws to enforce, because it's their job to, the county sheriffs have a lot of, in the Anglo-American legal tradition, the sheriff has a lot of latitude in which to work. And so I think that the sheriff could, a lot of sheriffs could try and assert that authority and say, we're not going to take away people's guns, we're not going to prohibit people from trading in these guns, we're not going to prohibit these guns from being made if they're manufactured in our county. And that would put pressure on the governors to do the same, because are the governors going to try and crack down and send in state law enforcement to bring these counties into compliance? Or, because again, that would be very tough. I think if you had I don't think that we would see a face-off if, let's say, Grady Judd, sheriff of Polk County, said after one of these laws is passed, hey, in Polk County, those laws are as good as mud. They're unconstitutional, and I swore an oath to the Constitution. When I was sworn in as sheriff, I'm not enforcing those laws. Is Ron DeSantis going to send in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to, whip Grady Judd into shape? I don't think so. That's not going to happen. Not in this state. And I think there's a lot of states where that same thing will happen. I think, Greg Abbott, who is much, is not a firebrand, I believe, flat out said that, priority number one on the next legislative session for Texas is going to be to declare Texas a sanctuary state for the Second Amendment. And so there you go. I mean, if you have Texas nullifying these laws, if you have Missouri, which seems to be a pretty certain thing, Oklahoma, Wyoming, I've covered these different states. They have bills in the legislature. Unfortunately, the Florida legislature is pretty weak, I think, on the Second Amendment stuff. They capitulated after Parkland, raised the age to buy a rifle from 18 to 21. That happened to affect me because I think I was like 20 or 19 at the time. And so that kind of pissed me off, I remember, because I went from being able to legally, I turned 18, and all of a sudden, oh, now I can own a rifle. And then they raised the age, and then I lost that right. And it was, kind of annoyed me. And obviously, a lot of those same legislatures our legislators are still in the legislature. And so I don't have a lot of faith in the Florida legislature. But if you have good county sheriffs pushing back against the federal government, and then on top of that, them pushing the governor to take this sort of a position, I think that the legislature will fall in line with that and will be amenable to that sort of thing. I don't think the Florida legislature is inherently anti-gun. I think that they're pro-winning. And so if they think that the way for them to win politically is to become a Second Amendment sanctuary, they're going to do it because they're very smart politically. There's a reason why, even though Florida's been a swing state for quite some time, I believe the Republicans have controlled the Florida legislature since 1996, or maybe it was 94 even, a very long time. Or maybe they didn't control both houses since that time in the 90s. Maybe it was just the House. But either way, they have a pretty tight iron grip. And this is a competitive state. That's because they're smart. They know what the right politically thing to, what the politically savvy thing to do is. And in that case, I think that they will come around to understand that the politically profitable move for them is to defend the Second Amendment. Florida overall is a very pro-gun state. Our law, we don't really have many, state-level gun laws. I mean, you have to get a permit for a concealed carry, but it is shall issue. I mean, we don't have constitutional carry. We don't have open carry. But, generally speaking, a lot of people here like guns and they have guns, including people who are not, your staunch Republicans. There are people on the left who have guns. In fact, I know very distinctly two, I don't know, older, but like 50-plus guys who are very, very anti-Trump, who are very big gun guys. So, I mean, it's not as strict of a partisan thing here. And then again, I think it isn't in a lot of places. I think that it's a cultural thing in a lot of parts of the country. Certain places, guns are common and popular, and they're, widely, they're widely used. And in other parts of the country, it's more something that is associated with gang violence. I think that people who are from, the inner city, there's a stigma about, if you got guns are, the kinds of things that gangbangers carry around in their pants. It's not really something that a good person has in their possession. Luckily, in Florida, we don't really have these urban metropolises like they do in other states. There is no Chicago or New York in Florida. Our cities are very spread out. I mean, you go to a place like Miami, there are gun shops in Miami. People in Miami, in the city, own guns. It's a common thing. The rural-urban division over guns, I don't think is nearly as strong in a place like Florida as it would be in a place like New York, where, you go outside of New York City, yeah. People like guns, but because of New York City itself being so anti-gun, the rest of the state has to deal with a lot of crap. I mean, what was it? I believe it was Reddington. Had to move out of New York finally because the New York state laws were just too strict on them, and they couldn't produce stuff anymore. But as I've said for a while, the gun issue, there's no room for debate left. There's no compromise here. The pro-gun people are set in their ways, thankfully, and the anti-gunners decide to seriously come after gun rights in this country, especially, I haven't even gotten to the filibuster yet. If they do so by abolishing the filibuster, and they really, really make it such a partisan thing, they have, very little, they might get a few rhinos to vote for it, but if McConnell lets them, that's a tough thing. Even Murkowski, I guess Murkowski might. Maybe even Susan Collins. But they sure as hell would never get 60 votes. They're not getting 10 Republicans to defect. You would need what? You would need Collins, Murkowski, Mitt Romney. Who else would even be anti-gun? Who else is that liberal? I can't think of anyone. Because, I mean, even, people, because you have these guys who really hate Trump, but that doesn't mean that they're supposed to be anti-Republican, necessarily. They're not supposed to hate guns, the guys who are anti-Trump. The idea behind the Never Trump folks in the Senate was that, well, we're defending true conservatism. We really care about these things. When Trump, he's making us look bad. Ben Sasse was supposed to be a very conservative senator when he was elected. I can't see Ben Sasse you know, if he has any ounce of dignity left, you know, voting for for gun bans. I mean, that's just something it's such an anathema to the Republican voter. I mean, again, a Bob Corker. How would a Bob Corker do that? A Roy Blunt. I mean, I guess Roy Blunt's retiring. He could vote for a gun grab if he wanted, but I mean, you know, he's still a Republican from Missouri. You know, deep down. I mean, you have to go really, really hard to vote for a gun ban if you're a Republican senator. And so that's why 60 votes is out of the question. They're not going to be able to get it through budget reconciliation either. I believe they already you can use budget reconciliation once a year. I believe they already did that. That was how they passed Obamacare, by the way. It was budget reconciliation, I believe. And so in order to do this, they need to nuke the filibuster with the support of Sinema and Manchin. And, you know, again, Manchin's political career would just be over. He's from West Virginia. And maybe he thinks that, okay, well, I won't get reelected anyway. Does he really want to go home and be hated by people in West Virginia? Like, including even, I mean, think of the Democrats that are left in West Virginia. I still think would probably be pretty pro-gun. You know, you don't have a professional class in West Virginia. You don't have a lot of doctors and lawyers in West Virginia. You don't have, you know, there's not a big urban center there. I believe Charleston is the capital of West Virginia. It's hard to even call it a city. It's a nice sized town. Actually looks like an okay place. You know, not very busy. It doesn't, you know, and so I can't imagine culturally there that if he went home after voting for some kind of gun ban thing like this, I don't know how you do it. Maybe what he would get away with is he would vote to end the filibuster and then vote against the gun control. Maybe I could see Manchin doing something like that. It would be a Manchin type of thing to do. So you have, maybe you have Manchin vote to end the filibuster and then vote against the gun ban things. But then you have Collins and Murkowski put it over 51. I don't know how that would play out. But anyway, either way, the local politics behind it are not as important as the national politics and what that would do. If you have a very divisive, let's say 50-50 vote, and then you have Kamala Harris come in and break the tie to ban guns, I mean, that's red meat. Any red state governor who doesn't try and rise up against that and nullify that law is going to be politically, and that's political malpractice right there. Because, I mean, that's such an easy win. You can see it's totally divisive. You know, it's the Democrats had to rewrite the rules of the Senate to get this horrible, unconstitutional law passed. And so it would be your duty as a state executive, and it would be your political prerogative if you have any interest in, you know, making your constituents happy and having a political future, to have stand up against this and say, you know, draw a line in the sand and say, so far, no further. Now, somebody like DeSantis, I think, would do that, because I think he's politically savvy. He has an interest in running for president. Obviously, he wants to win re-election in 2022, and so even though I haven't heard specifics, and I don't think that the Florida Republican Party is naturally, you know, I don't think that their bedrock principle is that they have that the Second Amendment is like a bedrock principle for them. I think that they care about winning, but because of that, I think that in this context, they could be relied upon. Kind of similar to how although I'm a little more confident in them than Mitch McConnell, but again, in this context, I think that Mitch McConnell, if they nuked the filibuster, or tried to, McConnell would do everything in his power to stop it. And in fact, McConnell has already said last week that if they try and nuke the filibuster, not over guns, but just in general, he's going to use the rules of the Senate to make sure no bill gets passed, period. And that would be something very interesting to watch, because nobody knows the machinery of the Senate parliamentary procedure better than Mitch McConnell. That's why he's been where he is as long as he is, even though everyone hates him. I mean, I don't like the guy. Nobody likes him. No, Democrats don't like him. Republicans don't like him. But let's be honest, he's much smarter than Chuck Schumer. I think that McConnell and Pelosi, they're old, they're decrepit, but they know what they're doing as far as from a Machiavellian standpoint. And so when they're on your side, on an issue, in a particular case, because again, by case-by-case basis, because as human beings, they're on nobody's side except for their own. They're terrible people, both of them. But if they're going to turn their evil skills sort of in your direction to help you and your cause, you can feel pretty good about that. And so I think that It would be very interesting to watch what McConnell tries to do, because again, that would be one of the big moments of his career. Because if you understand who McConnell is as a political figure, he has a picture of Henry Clay hanging in his office, the great pacificator Henry Clay, as in the man who brokered compromises. He was the Speaker of the House back in the 1830s and other times too. I mean, he was around forever, decades in American politics. Henry Clay was an unprincipled man. He believed not in any ideology, he just believed in the system and wanting to make the system function correctly, and that's how he saw himself. He saw himself as an institution, as someone who was holding up, the Congress, and that's kind of how McConnell sees himself too. It's not that he cares so much about protecting gun rights, from on a personal level. It's that he would be offended that the Democrats would butcher and manipulate the legislative process in order to get it done. I think that if there was 60 votes to strip away gun rights and to ban guns, I think that McConnell would probably be fine with it. I don't think he would care that much. I think what would bother him is that they're trying to do it with 50+1. And so given that, he may, it might be McConnell's last stand. And he, who knows, he might pull through. But as I was discussing earlier, even if this gets through, if they get it through on the slimmest of margins, if McConnell really makes them work hard, if McConnell's able to whip the Republican, you can't really call them a minority because they are half, but the Republican half of the Senate, if he can keep them in line and make sure that they're, at most one or two defectors, at most Collins and Murkowski, but if everybody else stays lockstep and votes against this gun control stuff, I think that PR-wise, this will be seen as an incredibly divisive coup against the Bill of Rights, and it would be the proper kind of acceleration that you would want to see going for the you know what I mean. This would be a lot better of an alternative to just stripping away. To just doing the gun registration thing, which might be able to get through and which might not upset a lot of people. If you really rip the Band-Aid off, you're going to make and really eat into people's gun rights. You're going to get a much stronger backlash, or a blowback, to borrow a phrase from the CIA. When it comes to the erosion of constitutional rights, it's the death by 1,000 cuts that you really have to be worried about. Because remember, people talk about how, the lockdowns prove that that all these people who say, well, if the government would come and take our guns, we'll fight back, proves them wrong. Well, no, I mean, gun stores were declared to be an essential business, in all of the red states that I know of, even when the lockdowns first started. And again, in a lot of these places, you didn't really have much of a lockdown. Like here in Florida, they told the restaurants to shut down for a couple weeks. And at that point, back in March, we could still credibly assume that there was a public health justification for this, and it made sense, to not be going out, because we didn't know how bad this disease was, we didn't know that it wasn't that bad. And so it's not really fair to say that in all these red states, just because there are really bad lockdowns in blue states that already, have given up their gun rights, it's not really fair to say that people in red states would not fight to preserve the Second Amendment, when the Second Amendment was never touched throughout the entire, year of 2020. That right was never eroded. Again, at least where I live, even when they tried to close as much as possible. I remember for a couple days, it reminded me of like driving on the roads immediately after a hurricane when there are no cars. There was a very, very short period of time that things really were locked down in a sense. But even during that time, the gun stores stayed open. Concealed carry permits were still being issued. Oh, and concealed carry permits are issued by the Commissioner of Agriculture, who happens to be a Democrat in Florida. She won just barely through cheating, of course. They just barely cheated enough to get her in. She didn't actually win. This was back in 2018 when we had the whole issue with Broward and West Palm Beach County, and then those I won't get into the whole election controversy back then, but it was very similar to 2020, which is why when 2020 rolled around, I was pretty skeptical of the election results. So let's end on a high note. This has been a very long and drawn out and meandering spiel, I understand. But I've had a lot to talk about, and I've been thinking about this all day, and this is going to be going up very late. But something positive to consider is that if things go through, let's follow the chain of events here as I've laid them out, because I've laid out a lot of possibilities. But let's lay out this scenario. They pass a so-called assault weapons ban and a so-called high-capacity magazine ban, essentially the '94 Clinton gun bill. They passed it through the House, and then through various machinations, ending the filibuster, and all of McConnell fails at his last stand, and that passes the Senate, and we get so-called assault weapons, scary-looking guns, and magazines over 10 rounds banned with a grandfather clause. Then what we want to see, and this is the most important step, we want to see red states, red jurisdictions, county sheriffs, which again in Virginia, I was very proud year ago, 2 years ago maybe. We saw this in Virginia, sheriffs standing up and saying, no, we're not going to enforce this law. It was the same law that they tried to pass in Virginia. They ultimately backed down, I think, because of the pressure from the sheriffs. If red state sheriffs and a handful of red state central governments start saying no to this, we're going to get the nullification of this law. There's going to be a standoff, and eventually people will realize, oh, this is just like marijuana. And yeah, they passed this gun law, but in certain places it's not really applicable, it's not really being enforced, and we don't have to worry about it. And that will lead to a major de-escalation of conflict in America if all of a sudden in these places that say no, so far and no further, we're not enforcing this, people will feel a lot better. And I think that, and I think justifiably, the tension will be reduced. And so that's what I'm hoping that we're witnessing here. I hope that this is a blow off top, because if things, again, look really, really scary, but then, the state and local governments pull through by nullifying the federal government, just as it's